black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know.
I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun, grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage, all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. We'll be talking to Blake, and Blake's actually lived in 3 different states. He lived in North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and he's had several encounters with Sasquatch, but he's also had this very strange encounter that happened to him in Florida, and the more and more Blake and I spoke, I really think that was a turning point in his life, that weird light that followed him and his girlfriend along the beach. And Blake was telling me, he said, Wes, I really think all this is interconnected somehow. And so I'm fascinated to hear what he has to say. I know he's nervous about coming on. I told him, don't be nervous. It's not an interrogation. I really am fascinated to hear what he has to say, and maybe keep an open mind when you hear him talk. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. On the website, if you click on shop, I actually have a new merchandise item up there. It's a Sasquatch Chronicles flask. It's camo green, stainless steel. It's really thick metal, and it's engraved on the front, Sasquatch Chronicles. So if you get a chance, check it out if you're looking for a gift for a loved one. I'm actually heading down to Texas on Wednesday for Thanksgiving. Can't wait to have a Southern Thanksgiving, and I'm going to have to pick up some of those while I'm down there. But if you get a chance, check it out. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Blake to the show. Blake, thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Blake. And I know you actually had a couple encounters we'll talk about tonight, but all this started in North Carolina. If you would you just kind of start from the beginning and walk us into what happened?
Sure. Well, my first experience was in 2011. I was living, I was living in Highlands, North Carolina, and it was in the Nantahala National Forest there in western North Carolina. Highlands is 4,100 feet up on a plateau, just nestled in the middle of the National Forest up there, and very remote. It's the Highlands Cashers area. Cashers is the next town over. And there's just a lot of really beautiful mountains, biggest granite face, east of the Mississippi's out there in the Cashers Valley, and just a lot of wild territory. So I lived there for years, and I was an account executive in town, in this little small town, and I was married at the time, and I would go out hiking all the time because, like, everywhere you just drive down the road up there, and you're on a trailhead, and you can just go to all these amazing places. And a lot of them, like, tourists didn't even know about, like just all the locals knew, and just really beautiful, kind of otherworldly places, primeval forests and stuff like that. And so we rented a house at one point from a guy who spent like half the year as a doctor. The other half of the year he spent sailing, and he was just a real adventurous kind of type, but very reserved. And when we first met him and he was showing us around the house, he was like, we were kind of getting to know each other, and he was showing me around the property, and was like, I'll have to take you guys up to, when he found out I was an avid backpacker and hiker, he was like, I'll have to take you and, excuse me, you and your wife up to this place through this really expensive neighborhood, and you go through this garden, and then you go down through by this road, and then you get on this trail, and it's like this old, almost like a old boar hunter's trail that just like nobody used anymore, had been like abandoned for years, and it took you out to this like secret spot on the far side of like what were called the fodder stacks up there. And so it was just way away from everybody, and nobody knew about it, and he's like, I guarantee I'm the only person that's been out here in however many years, So he took us out there one day, and it became a really favorite spot of ours because we could walk to it, just, walk out the front door, walk up the road, and walk through this neighborhood, and then you're in the forest, and then you're out in the middle of wilderness territory, very quick and easy access. And I would go sometimes. I worked a very stressful job, deadlines on top of deadlines on top of deadlines, and I would constantly use hiking as my therapy. And so after, like, it gets dark in the mountains pretty early up there, and especially on that plateau. And we, like the later in the year, the darker it got earlier. So I got off work one day and decided to go on a hike pretty much right after work. I hiked out, we'd been going out to the spot for a while. I hiked out for a long time. We'd been going out there for a while, and I hiked way out to the granite face, and I sat out there for a little bit, and then I started to head back once after sundown, and there's still like twilight, so I was making my way back through this really, really dense brush. It was like you basically had to crawl through this trail. It was so dense and overgrown. So I was making my way back to this creek that went down from the fodder stacks, and I was following this creek bed back down so I could get back over to this neighborhood. It was totally quiet, like it was one of those nights. It was just so still and so quiet, and very peaceful. And I all of a sudden, as I was walking downhill with the creek to my right, it didn't have any flowing water, and it was dried up creek bed, by the way. There was this, off, I guess about 40 yards from me, to like my left, 7, 8 o'clock, I don't know, something like that. Something just came out of nowhere and just like blasted through the forest behind me, into full sprint in just a split second. And I turned around, and it was huge and heavy. I could tell just from the sound initially. So I turned around. I just saw something move past me so fast. I knew it wasn't. It was surreal because it was so fast, and it was very large, and it was this like gray color, and I like stood there because I'd never encountered anything. I've never encountered anything strange in the forest or anything paranormal, in my life or anything like that. So I stood there for a second, and I was trying to figure out what kind of animal this was, and because I've encountered a lot of wildlife out there. What happened was it ran full sprint, just a blur in front of my eyes, huge animal on all fours. And then it just stopped. Once it got across the creek, it just stopped, like instantly, made no sound, and just like, I couldn't see a thing, but I knew there was this huge thing sitting there watching me. And I was like, I felt like it was like a predator of some kind, you know? And so I had that feeling. So I immediately just turned around and just kind of scurried back down, you know, and kind of looked over to my right shoulder at this point because it had gone behind me. So I was like kind of looking over to my right as I was making my way back, and then felt pretty comfortable once I got back into the neighborhood. But the thing was, it didn't fit the description of anything. Like it wasn't a wild boar, you know, it wasn't like a giant wild boar because I would have seen the detail. There was enough light for that. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a wolf. And it wasn't a panther, because I mean, any of those things I would have seen. This thing was a lot larger, and it was just a gray blur. And the way that it sprinted full sprint from being totally silent behind me to like, and it was heavy. That was the other thing. It was heavy on all fours. It was very heavy. Like I could feel it, you know, I could feel it under my feet. So I was like, not feel comfortable. I left. I went back to my house, and I kind of just jokingly, after I settled back in for about half an hour, I kind of just jokingly like said to my wife, like, oh yeah, because I was thinking about what that was, you know, and I was like, it felt like it was like a wolf, like a really big wolf, you know, but I'm like, there's no big gray wolves out there. So I was like, I just sort of jokingly was like, I just ran into a giant wolf in the forest, you know, and like, she's like, really? And I was like, yeah, like this big thing ran behind me, you know, and I just kind of left it at that. I just kind of dismissed it and just left it. And I didn't really think it, because see, here's the thing. Like, at that time, I wasn't Sasquatch wasn't on my radar really. You know, I've always been interested in, the unknown. And, when I was a kid, you know, growing up watching the X-Files and reading science fiction, and then I got into like esoteric philosophy, hermetic philosophy, and stuff like that. And so, I was always into, very, very passionate about the mysteries and the unknown. And that's part of the reason that it's just in my nature just to go out and explore the woods, just get out in the real world and just see, the beauty of nature and everything. And in addition to being therapy. So I had cultivated this lifestyle where I was like living, I started living in the North Georgia mountains. I moved up to Western North Carolina. I was just like living my dream life of being in the mountains and being able to just hike out wherever I went. And to me at the time, Sasquatch was still, even though I've always been very curious and very, very committed to trying to unravel the mysteries of life and things like that. Sasquatch to me was still like a myth, a legend kind of thing,
Yeah, I get it.
I definitely was open to it. I was definitely open. Like if somebody told me, I had a Sasquatch encounter or whatever, blah, 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 I probably would have just been like, I don't have any reason to not believe you. I've heard some crazy things. And that was 2011. And then moved to Sarasota, Florida in 2012. Some spooky stuff happened down there. And that was kind of the start of it. I ended up moving.
What kind of things happened down there? I'm curious.
It's not something I normally talk about because I don't. It's so strange, and it's just so strange, and it was a really hard time in my life. I ended up getting really sick after like a few months after living there. I woke up one day and I just felt like I had fallen out of our 3-story apartment and landed on my ass. That's the best way I can describe it. I was just in a tremendous amount of pain, and I went to an urgent care, and they were like, "Oh, you have," they checked me out, and they were like, "Oh, it looks like you got prostatitis, and you got a really bad infection," and it just happened overnight, and it ended up turning into this thing where it was ongoing, and I started to have these symptoms of like all these autoimmune diseases. Like almost like just overnight, I had been exposed to some kind of chemical or something that or like the infection triggered a bunch of stuff or something like that. But
kinda,
something
kind of like you've been poisoned.
Yeah, it was similar to that, but it changed to where it moved from like my reproductive organ in that general region was really messed up for like the duration that we lived there, and then I started to get all these other mysterious symptoms like burning, like really extreme sensitivity to the skin, like writhing, around in pain for no reason, aching like to my blood, like it felt like my blood had been poisoned, my bones. And there were days, weeks, like I lost my job, and there were days, weeks, and my wife was supporting us where I couldn't even hardly get out of bed. And then I started having sleep paralysis for the first time while I was there, and that was the first time that ever happened. And some really weird stuff happened, Wes. Like some really, really weird stuff happened while I was awake, and sort of out of body stuff that I don't want to go into all that right now. But what I can say is like
I don't want to push into it.
Well, yeah. But what I can say is that there was a lot of really spooky stuff. Like we saw our first UFOs after we moved there, like right after we moved there. And this thing with my prostate didn't start happening until after our first sighting. After our initial sighting, which was on the beach late at night, we had this like light follow us down the beach. And like when we would stop, it would stop, and it was just like, it looked kind of like a paper lantern. That's what we thought it was at first.
How big was it? Just from
it was bigger than a paper lantern. And it didn't have any shape or definition to it. It was just this orange ball of light, and it followed us down the beach. And then when we drove home that night, a helicopter followed us to our apartment, like really close on top of, like, I was driving an F-150 at the time, and it was pretty low. And we drove back to the apartment, and we realized we didn't think it was following us or anything. We didn't even put two and two together until we made it back to the apartment complex, which was like about a 5-minute drive from the beach. And we pulled into the apartment complex, and this helicopter kept circling around the apartment complex. So we got a little spooked at that point, because we had just had our first UFO sighting, and then this helicopter somehow somehow just coincidentally ends up back at our place. And so we immediately went inside. We were roommates with my brother at the time, who I'm very good friends with. He's 6 years younger than me. We went inside, and we were like, hey man, we just saw this UFO, and there's this helicopter, and he could hear the helicopter over the building. And so he was like, what? He's like, no way. And so we started looking stuff up, like in the local forums and local newspapers and stuff, to see if anybody else had posted anything about a similar situation, just because that's the kind of people that we were, just investigators by nature. There was like another report of something that had happened that was very similar, and my brother's sitting there reading it with us, and we're just like, wow, that's weird, And then it was just, again, sort of like coincidentally, very soon after that, we started to see craft, or not craft, but things out in the Gulf. Like when we would stare off at night, it was like we would see this, what looked like a star, but then we realized that it was like close to the horizon or something. But then we realized that it was it would like crawl sort of like an ant, like it was sort of moving. And we saw this a couple times, and on a couple occasions we would watch this thing, and then like little really bright balls of light would like scatter out of it. and just disappear. So we knew it wasn't a star, you know. So we didn't know what it was, but a lot of stuff happened after that with me that got really spooky.
Can I ask you real quick about the ball of light, the first one that you guys saw? How big was it like the size of a soccer ball? Was it the size of a Volkswagen? How big was that thing that was following you down the beach line?
It was pretty close to us. And it was very low. Judging by the distance, it was probably the size of maybe a bike, you know, like a motorcycle. Yeah.
And then shortly after that, you got sick. That's odd. That's really odd.
And I didn't put anything together until I actually didn't start piecing all this stuff together until later on down the road, when I started to recover more. And I ended up having to move back to Atlanta because we just went into, which is where I'm from, because we just went into like financial breakdown and had to get back to a place of support and recovery and stuff like that. I had to get some specialists involved, you know, to look at me for all these things that I was having problems with. And a lot of the symptoms were like Lyme disease. So there was just a lot of talk about that going around. And I came back here and I came back to Atlanta, and I was like, it was almost like instantaneously I got better. Like all of a sudden, I was just like within a month or two, my health was restored. And so I started thinking environmental and stuff like that. But here's the thing, Wes, like there were things that were happening there, like that I didn't find out till later on till later on, I started like reading other people's experiences and hearing about these things that I realized like what may have been going on. For instance, every single morning for about 4 to 5 months during that period, every single morning, for about 4 months, around the same exact time in our apartment on the third floor, I would wake up around the same time every morning, like around 4:30. I would wake up to the most overwhelming, noxious, like hydrogen sulfide boiled egg smell, you know? And, I mean, to the point where, and I don't know if it was because of the smell or if it was because of what was going on with my body or whatever, but every morning at the same time, I would wake up to that smell just filling the room, and I would immediately go to the toilet and I'd have to vomit. And there were mornings where I could not stand vomiting. So I would like take all these like, you know, essential oils that she had. And like, you know, I'd just like start like, you know, like inhaling them, trying not to vomit. And I'd get out of the apartment as fast as I could. And I'd like go to the beach and try to make it without vomiting. and the thing is, she was there to validate the smell. But here's the thing, to her, it was very mild. It was like this very, very mild boiled egg, you know, sulfur smell. And my brother in the next room over never smelled it once. And it got to the point where it was so intrusive and so intense for me that we ended up going to like the leasing office and talking with them in person about it, trying to see if anybody had like filed any complaints ever, or, you know, if someone was pouring something outside or, you know, whatever. And they were just totally clueless as to what it could be.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And no one else ever got sick from it, huh? Just yourself?
Nobody. Yeah, my wife was not affected by it. My brother was not affected by it. Some other events happened there that she was able to experience with me that validated some of the other spooky stuff that was going on. And when I would go out I went out into Mayaca State Park a lot too. And I just like, I went there for the wildlife because I'm a nature photographer and, just by hobby, you know, it's like something that I do. I just love wildlife. So like, it's something I incorporate with like my deep, like my backpacking and my hiking and stuff like that. So, you know, I always have my camera on me. You know, I was always out in Mayaca State Park, which is only like a 20-minute drive from where we lived, and the beach was really close. And like, it wasn't until way later down the road that I found out that like people were seeing, you know, Sasquatch in Mayaca State Park and stuff like that. That's a wild place too, man. But
yeah, it sounds like it. Sounds like crazy experiences, man. I've heard of that before, and sometimes with, and I'm not saying anything demonic was going on, but a lot of times with demonic encounters, people will say they smell the sulfur, that rotten egg type smell. Could have been something in the apartment, but it's odd no one else got sick. You know what I mean?
Well, and here's the thing: I didn't plan on telling you any of this during this conversation. I really just wanted to focus on Sasquatch.
Yeah, and we can, and I didn't
not even speculate because I've been like a whole like mixed bag of emotions about all this for a while now. Like my friend who has been having a lot of these encounters with me now for a while, who's been my backpacking buddy for years. He lives up in Asheville, and that's North Carolina. Anyways, he's just been telling me for years, like, dude, you got to go. And he even, would take the things. He's been telling me for years, you gotta email Wes, you gotta reach out to this guy and tell him about the stuff that you're telling me. And that was even before he started having the encounters. Like he's a real skeptical guy. And he'd spent just as much time, or maybe even more, in the wilds of Western North Carolina and Colorado and stuff, Tennessee. And he had never had any weird encounters or anything like that. And when I started having these encounters, I would go to him every time and be like, dude, he's like my best friend. I'd be like, bro, like all this stuff, this weird thing happened, And after a while, it just got to the point where he was just like, is my friend crazy? Or... and
no, I hear you.
And I got to the point, and we'll circle back around to all that. But I got to the point where, because with Sarasota, now that we're talking about all this, and might as well, with Sarasota, a lot of that stuff ended up following me back, kind of following me around, and there's been a lot of interesting discoveries and some more, there's we could do a whole nother interview on just the spooky stuff that's happened that I can't explain. Just in my own bedroom.
Yeah, no, yeah. I'd like to. And I appreciate you sharing it, honestly.
Yeah.
Sure. I find it fascinating. And, whenever something like this happens, I've said it before in the past, you always think, God, why is this happening to me? And then people who listen to it are like, I know exactly what he's talking about. That happened to me. And so a lot of more people come forward, but I don't want to push you on Florida. I would love to do another show.
I mean, and I appreciate that, Wes. And the thing is, like, that over the years, I've gone on forums after my experiences, like on that side of the spectrum, and I've found people saying the same exact thing that happened to me. Same exact experience. So I've been able to validate. Something like that happened to somebody 3 years before it happened to me, but it was the same exact scenario, and with every traumatic event that's happened, like in my bedroom, I've been able to find somebody out there that had pretty much the exact same thing happen to them. So, that really, 2011, 2012, things really started to change for me. And I really started to think, oh my God, like all of this X-Files stuff and all of this like Sasquatch stuff and all this, like there may be a lot more to it than I realized. And I had already been studying like adept traditions and, like I said, Hermetic philosophy for a while. So I knew about the more like esoteric side of things, and was open to all of that. But I just, once it became tangible, and started to affect me, it was like, I always wanted to know. Of course, like I always wanted to see a UFO. But like once it started to affect me, it totally changed because it was invasive. It wasn't what I expected. It was scary, and it's traumatizing, and it took years to deal with and process.
Kind of goes back to that old saying: "Be careful what you wish for, because it might just happen."
Exactly, and I actually tell people that that have no idea I've ever been, that I've ever experienced things like that. I tell people that it's like the people that are like, oh, I want to see an alien. It's like, are you sure about that? Are you sure you really want to see, cause I started to question that a lot, for sure. And,
well, let's do this. I'd like to do a part 2 on some of the weird stuff, but, going back to, so you moved to Georgia, and tell me about Georgia. What happened there?
Yeah. So So I started. So actually, while I was in Atlanta, I stayed in Atlanta for a little while, and I didn't actually move back to Western North Carolina until 2016. So I was here going through a process of deal with some of the things that had followed me back from Florida, physically, and then some of the things that were still ongoing. And then, in more of the realm of like the unknown. And I ended up going to a therapist, licensed counselor and psychologist and, holistic practitioner. And, sitting down with her and being like, I need you to hear this, all this stuff about the more paranormal stuff that I just shared with you. And I just need to share all this stuff with you. And I told her way more than I just told you. And I was like, I just need to know, like, is there something, am I crazy? Like, does this sound crazy? Because, am I imagining all of this, and by the end of the whole thing, she was just like, no, actually, your story, what you've told me is very like, consistent. And, if you were schizophrenic or something, it'd be all over the place. And, she's like, you have a consistent story. And she said, and actually I've helped people, some of my patients have implants removed. That's what she said. She said, I've actually helped some of my patients in conjunction with other medical staff have implants removed from their bodies. So she confided in me, like immediately, as soon as I confided in her, and she kind of gave me the validation that I needed, that I wasn't like losing my mind. It was like, hey, you're not the only one. So that was kind of comforting. But so I was in Atlanta for a little while, back again to Atlanta, and I was just like going through a divorce and trying to figure all that out and trying to figure out my next move, career wise. And I knew I wanted to get back up to Western North Carolina. I was definitely visiting often. And speaking of visiting Western North Carolina, when I first came back to Atlanta in 2013, is actually when the first like separation started with my ex and I, and I'm telling you all this for a reason. We started to sort of drift apart, and I was looking, at like, I was kind of just like, this changes everything. Like we've been together for almost 10 years, and it was like I didn't know what to do. So I just I picked up a courier job and half the week in Atlanta, and then I got in touch with a buddy that lives in Highlands, that owns a restaurant and a painting company up there. And I was like, hey man, can I help you out, through the winter and stuff? Cause it kind of shuts down, this little mountain town. And then get things going for you, as things start to gear up for the season. He was like, yeah, come on. So I started spending this is 2013. I started spending half my weeks in Atlanta, still sort of living with my ex. And then the other half of my week in Western North Carolina. A good friend of mine had, who I had been friends with for, several years at that point, ended up coming back through while I was working at the restaurant up there one night. And she, it was just like this really awesome encounter. I was always really attracted to this person, really drawn to this person, beautiful girl, and just, older than me, but like, she just had this allure about her and something really special, and so I always felt that, and she was really the only person that I ever felt that way actually while I was married. So she was just a dear friend, and I ended up reconnecting with her in that way, just in a sort of intimate way, but not like physically, just, like we started sharing a lot of time together. And I was still trying to wrap my head around, okay, this is where it gets weird, even weirder. So I started trying to wrap my head around all the stuff that was going on. And after that, the lady that I saw, that had been working with me for a while, the therapist, after after she told me what she told me, I started having these feelings because one of my experiences, was very invasive, and it felt like it felt like somebody actually, went into my spine, went into my bone and stuff. And so I started like looking at like implants, and like I was like looking at like the videos on YouTube, of the doctor, I can't remember his name, who like purportedly, or who has all these films of like him removing these
Oh yeah,
unearthly objects from people.
I've
like
watched many of them.
Very strange places in their body, and they sort of like reconfigure when you put them in the little beakers, after they break into pieces, and just strange things like that. I started looking at that, and I was like, wow, this is a thing. I had actually stayed up the night before. I had made plans to go and see her. I made plans to leave Atlanta a little early and go up to see her. She was staying at her mom's just outside of Fletcher, North Carolina, which was only about an hour and 15-minute drive from Highlands. So I was like, well, I'll just leave a little early this week, go up, spend the night with her. We'll camp out, and the weather was good, and we'll camp out on their property. So, but what's interesting is, and it's so weird. I really just wanted to, like I said, man, and I'm sorry to say this again, but I really just wanted to like talk about Sasquatch, but I'm realizing now that I have to tell you this other stuff because it's interrelated. I've come to find that it's somehow interrelated. I don't know how, but it's somehow interrelated. And I leave late at night. I'm not going to get up there until midnight at this point, by the time I leave Atlanta, because I'm working down there too. So I leave, I go up there, and she was living with her mom's best friend, who owned the house, and another lady who was her mom's best friend's sister, who had several strokes prior to my visit. So she was kind of like occupying a majority of the living space, and it was just kind of a really crowded house anyways. The house itself was, you had to drive outside of the city into the country, and then drive down these winding dirt roads for a while until you passed like the last farmstead. And then there was a road over, you had to cross this janky bridge across a creek, and then drive up this dirt road, and halfway up this mountain was their house. And they were in and on the edge of, tens of thousands of acres of pristine wilderness, undeveloped, untouched. There were old abandoned mining trails behind on their property, actually up in the forests, and these are very dense forests around their house. They had a couple horses. They had chickens, they had a bunch of stuff like that, but not too many animals. They had a dog and some cats and maybe like a couple parrots. But they lived a farm life, but it wasn't like a huge farm. It was just like this quaint little corner, like on the side of a mountain, and with all this wilderness to explore, no boundaries, And I had seen the spot that she had cleared off about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the house, from the parking lot at the house, back into the forest, up these old abandoned mining trails that are all overgrown. She had leveled off actually this sort of like chill space in the middle of the forest, right trailside on one of these old trails, and it was going down a hill at a pretty good slope. Not quite 45 degrees, but still a pretty good slope. And then we would just step off, and she had leveled the ground there and like hung a bunch of things and decorated it and just made it a really good chill spot. So this was the beginning of April. It was like a couple weeks into April, and up there in that area of the mountains around that time of the year, it's still typically pretty cold. You still have all the leaves off the tree. You have no fresh growth. It's just still dead forest, you can see through all the trees unless they're evergreens, There were a lot of ridge lines around there that you could see up on, and you could see the stars through them. And we could see the stars it was a crystal clear night when I got up there. It was just such a clear, bright, starry sky that we could just see, instantly. As soon as I got out of the truck and I met her in the parking lot, I was like, okay, let me grab my sleeping bag and my pack, and let's hike up to the spot, and let's just like put our sleeping bags out, and we don't even have to like pitch a tent. The weather was perfect. There wasn't any wind. There wasn't any moisture in the air. It was like cold enough. I mean, it was warm enough to just like sleep out in the open in these sleeping bags, which is really rare for that time of year up there in those mountains. And I was just relishing, I was just relishing in the opportunity. It was just so awesome because like where she cleared it out, we could see the stars so well where we lay, So we hiked up there, and we put our stuff down, and we sat down, and I said, listen, I want to, I had told her about some of the things that happened in Sarasota and some things that happened to me because she was open-minded, and she was from Florida, and she'd had some like ghost encounters when she was a kid that she had shared with me. So I said, listen, these things I've been telling you about a little bit. I said, I talked to this lady recently, and she talked about these implants. And so I was like up all night last night. I like barely slept. And I was looking up these implants, and watching this guy and the surgery videos and stuff. And while I was talking about that, I mean, we hiked up there. The ladies had been asleep for hours. We called them the Golden Girls. The Golden Girls had been asleep for hours, and no spotlights on around the house, or anything like that. And nobody's out there. I mean, nobody lives out there. You know what I mean? It was just us. And so we hiked a noisy hike on the crunchy leaves out into this place, and we sat down and started talking. I started telling her these things about the implants, like I said, and then as it was like 2 minutes into the conversation, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, okay, so we were facing one direction. Behind us, okay, so like we were sitting trail side. On my right was the trail sloping downwards, okay? So if you can visualize that, like right off to my right was the trail, and it was going, I was facing downward, on this slope. And up behind us, about 40 yards behind us, something just walks right onto the trail out of nowhere, like it had just been standing there the whole time. And it just starts to calmly walk towards us. And at first we thought bear, because it was just calmly walking towards us. And I've had a lot of bear encounters. Highlands, if anybody knows Highlands in that area, it is bear country. And I mean, every night black bear country, and every night almost every night that I would take my trash out, on my back porch, I'd be face to face with the bear. I had many face to face encounters with, really close up encounters with black bears. I know what things sound like in the forest. My ears were just already, tuned to pick things up. So this thing starts walking down the hill towards us. And then, I mean, she's like, she starts talking as this thing comes out. She doesn't even hear it at first. So I hear it before she does. I hear it walking slowly down the trail. And then I'm just like, okay, at that point it's coming closer, and I'm like, okay, shh, and she's like, I hear it, and it just continues to walk towards us. And we got up because we instantly, we both stood up at the same time, because as soon as we stopped to listen, we realized that whoever this was standing on two legs and walking down the trail. And it was like, again, it was like they had just been standing there, waiting for us. And nobody's supposed to be out there. So we were like, we stood up and just stood there in the darkness, not being able to see what was coming down through this really dense forest at us, walking on 2 feet, with heavy steps towards us very calmly. And the way it was walking, it was so confident that because we knew at that point it was on 2 legs, we instantly got the feeling, that this was a very large man, and that he had ill intent or something, because, at that point she started screaming, to identify yourself, this is private property, you're not supposed to be here, and nothing, and the individual just kept walking towards us calmly, step, 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 while she was yelling this stuff. So we were still thinking, who is this nut? We were thinking we were about to get, offed by some kind of crazy redneck in the forest, and it got closer, and it stopped about 20 yards from us, and we could see this looming sort of figure in the darkness, and we knew it wasn't a bear, and it had the presence of a man, and it was huge. It was like standing in the presence of a Viking, to us at the time. So we were still thinking it was just like some, psychopathic redneck with like, a knife or something. And she hid behind me, and she started screaming at this person, who we thought was a person. And I'm trying to figure out where my headlamp is. I usually always have my headlamp on me, but like I said, I was so comfortable, and I didn't get out of my pack because we navigated our way with the starshine. So it was like, I realized my headlamp was in my pack over there on the ground, and we were standing in the middle of the trail at that point, facing this individual or this thing. All of a sudden, just like it just stood there totally silent. We didn't hear a breath, we didn't hear sound, and all of a sudden it just ran full force at us. Like boom, boom, boom. 3 huge steps right at us. And I mean, like a blur, and it's pitch dark anyways. And then maybe about 7 to 10, well, about 10 feet in front of us, 10 to 12 feet in front of us, it dips off the trail right in mid, third foot landed, about 10 or 12 feet from us. And then it just dipped off into the woods to our right, because we were looking uphill at this point. So it dipped off in the woods to the right, to our right, its left, and scurried down the side of this hill. And I immediately went, and it ran down the hill. I mean, I say scurried, but it ran down the hill fast and stopped about 50, 60 yards down. And I in the process of it going down the hill, I was making my way over to my pack to get my headlamp out as fast as possible. And as soon as this thing stopped, I had my headlamp in my hand and, hit the headlamp and gave her one. We both had our lights, and we were shining our lights where we heard this thing stop, and we couldn't see anything. And it was like there were no big trees to hide behind. There were no, there was a lot of rhododendron, but it wasn't that area of the forest that we were looking down into with our lights that had decided to run. It was thick, and we were like, if that was a person, there's no way. There's absolutely no way that they could have made it more than 5 feet in. You know what I mean? But we could see through all the rhododendron and stuff with our lights really clearly. And there was just nothing there. But the thing is, we heard where it stopped, and we could still like feel it watching us, and it still felt like a him, it was like we could still feel him watching us. So we had this we had chills, because she stood, but when he charged, she stood behind me and squeezed me and like screamed, and I thought we were about to die. That's what it felt like. I thought we were about to die. And I didn't know what it was. And what's so strange, dude, is it was right in the middle of that conversation I was having with her, sharing with her like the stuff that I just found out about implants. That was my first, like, what I could definitely say was a physical, very tall human creature in the woods. And so we grabbed, like, I didn't have my camping knife or anything, and I always used to keep that stuff on me because it would like make me feel safe, when I was younger. But now it's like whatever. I was like thinking, like, damn, I don't have my knife, and so we just grabbed like the biggest sticks we could, and we like kind of walked backwards, as silently as we could to the parking lot of the house. We just stood there shaking, like just adrenaline pumping, just listening, because it was so quiet that like you could hear, it was one of those nights you could hear, a pine cone drop like, a half a mile out in the forest. You know what I mean? Any little sound was going to resonate through the forest. The frogs weren't out yet. The crickets weren't out yet. Because it was early April. So it was like totally quiet and totally clear outside, and no wind. So we were able to hear everything. So our ears were tuned over to where that encounter had happened, where we just got run at by this large man thing. And we didn't know what was going on. I wasn't thinking Sasquatch at the time. I had no idea what to think at the time. And then, so we're standing there just like not really talking, and we're standing there and we're like whispering, very quietly every once in a while, and we don't hear anything. And we're like, for sure, if there's something back there, an animal, we're close enough to where we could hear it moving, even a bear, as light as they walk, we're like, we could hear something traversing back there, and we couldn't hear anything.
Very fascinating account with Blake, and we'll return in a moment to find out what happens next. I want to take a break and thank one of our sponsors, MyBookie. Are you the type of fan that knows football so well that you could choose any game and call it? Well, MyBookie is a place for you, because you can turn that sports knowledge into cash into your wallet. Between football season, NBA, and the start of college basketball season, it's time to get off the sidelines and get in on the action with MyBookie. If you're going to bet this season, do the smart thing and go to mybookie.ag, because no one else gives you more ways to win. Are you tired of watching games from the couch with nothing to gain? MyBookie wants to get your mind off everything and back on the game. If you join right now, MyBookie will match your deposit halfway, all the way up to $1,000. That means if you deposit $2,000, you get an extra $1,000 in free money to play with. Definitely check out mybookie.ag. Just use the promo code Sasquatch to activate the offer. Once again, the promo code is Sasquatch to take advantage of MyBookie's generous sign-up offer. Visit mybookie.ag today. You play, you win, you get paid. And I want to thank MyBookie for sponsoring the show. Let's jump back into it. Blake, so after this encounter, you guys are standing in the parking lot. Did you guys just leave at this point?
We stayed there in the parking lot for about 25 minutes. And then all of a sudden I looked up. So I was, the way that we were standing in the parking lot was facing up to the top of the mountain that this house was built on. And we were looking over to we were sort of looking over adjacent to our right up, over where these trails had kind of gone sloped down, on this one little dip in the mountain. That's where we were focusing our ears and our attention. Now, the horses were to our left behind us. If you looked straight ahead, all you saw was just black forest in front of you. But if you looked up to your left, you could see a ridge line real close, maybe quarter mile or half mile up from where we were standing. And so we could see this ridge line, and you could see, like I said, it was, you could see a lot of the stars through the trees and stuff like that, even in really dense places. Well, up here on the ridge line, it was real sparse. You know, a lot of the trees were just very sparse. There weren't any leaves. There were a few evergreens growing up there on the tree line, and they were real tall, real tall trees. And I look up there on the ridge line, and I see this like purplish orange little tiny light up there, like, but it's up in the level with the tree, like it's up, you know, to the level of like where a street light would be, you know, like, and not just like a street light next to a house, like a street light, like, you know, like on the highway or something like that, like a higher, like a parking lot street light or something like that. But you know how sometimes those street lights have that sort of like, it's like an orange bulb, but it's covered with like a blue plastic cover, so it kind of gives it this purplish orange hue. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? There's some street lights like that. So that's what I saw. That's what I saw up there. And I didn't know the area that well. I mean, I you know, I'd seen it in the daytime a few times, but I hadn't like been out there and explored. So I was thinking up on the ridgeline when I looked over there, I was thinking up on the ridgeline that there was just a little neighborhood, like the end of a road or something, you know, just like a, you know, and maybe somebody had a trailer back there or something, and there was a street light up there. Well, as soon as I processed that thought, she grabbed me and like really yanked at me and pointed my attention, because I had turned my attention back over to where I was listening, you know, before. And as soon as I processed that thought, I just, you know, dismissed it. But then she grabbed me and pulled my head back over to it, and she said, "Do you see that?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You know, do you see that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's just like a street light or something." And she's like, "No, there's not. There's nothing up there. What is that?" You know? And so we started looking at this thing, and I was like, you know, we were whispering and not really. I was still not really talking, just watching this thing, and it wasn't moving, and it stayed fixed, you know, for a minute, and I was like, well, I was like, maybe somebody has their camper up there or something, you know, and they've got a floodlight on the back of their camper, you know what I mean? And she was like, "No, dude," like, she's like, "You can't, there's no road access up there anymore. You can't get a camper through to up there," you know? At that point, I was like, and all of a sudden, in that moment, the light turned from this purplish orange to this like pure LED white light. And what was so weird about it was that it wasn't illuminating like the trees around it, you know? And all of a sudden it just like started to slowly expand until it became this tower of white light, like pure white LED light. You know, that's the best I can describe it. This tower as tall as the trees. I mean, it was like the trees were actually blocking out, you know, the tops of some of these pines were actually blocking out some of the light from this thing. And I was like trying to rationalize what I was seeing, you know, and at that point she was physically jumping up and down and punching me on the arm. She didn't even know what to say. She didn't even know what to do, but we both realized at that point that we were witnessing something that wasn't normal, you know, we'd never seen before. And there was no noise. So I was like listening, you know, we were listening very quietly as this thing started to grow and expand. And I was looking to see like if like somebody was driving their ATV over the hillside, you know, and it was just the light playing tricks up in the trees, you know what I mean? Or if maybe there was a like a helicopter, like some really quiet helicopter that was flying, that was shining a light, and there's just no noise, you know, and we're so close, like I said. So I'm just like, what is this? And it started to expand until it became this full moon shaped, I mean, like a full moon shaped, like a perfect circle of white light. And it engulfed, I mean, it was behind the trees that we were looking at. So it was it was so big that I was still trying to rationalize what I was seeing. I was still like, okay, that's got to be the like some kind of super moon, full moon, just like rising swiftly over the horizon, and I'm just like completely out of my mind because I just had a very frightening experience. My adrenaline's pumping, you know what I mean? So I'm still trying to rationalize it at that point, and she is just on the verge of meltdown because of the feelings that we're getting, the chills that we're getting, you know, and what we're seeing. And this thing expands to like the size of like what you would see like a full supermoon on the horizon, you know, rising up on the top of the tree line like that. But we could see a perfect circle. And then it just starts to, just as slowly and quietly, soundlessly as it expanded, it it just started to shrink back down very slowly into this little tiny point of white, pure white light up in the tree, and then it just blinked out and nothing, you know. And so we ended up like trying to figure out at that point what our next move was, and we looked at the house and the lights were off, and we were like, hey, if we go in there, we're going to disturb all of them. We wanted more than anything to go in there and wake all of them up because this stuff was happening on their property. And, you know, this old lady that owns the house, she is a like firecracker, you know, so she would have brought out like the shotgun or something, you know. I mean, she's a very well refined woman, but she doesn't play around, you know. And she knows these woods. She knows she's been living there in that home for 30, 40 years. So we wanted to go in and wake them up, but we just decided, like, you know what? I've got my tent. We're right in between two big trucks in this gravel lot, my truck and then one of their trucks. And you know, if we go inside, we're going to wake everybody up. And, you know, this lady who's been struggling with, you know, these strokes and all of her conditions and everything, we're just like, let's just pitch the tent and let's just stay out here. And we stayed out there, and we just stood around quietly in the parking lot for hours into the night, not really speaking, you know. And then we started to just feel a little safer, and then finally and we decided that we were going to go up there the next day where we saw the light and see if we could find anything, you know. And so we about 5 a.m, we finally laid down for a little bit and then didn't really sleep. And when the sun came up, first thing we did was we went inside and we told the lady that owns the house what happened. And she was just like, I've never heard anything like this in my life. And so she immediately pulled out her laptop. She's a very resourceful lady. And she pulled up a GPS, like she had like a upgrade, you know, Google Earth on her thing, you know. And she pulled up the imagery of where we were and everything, and started looking around, and we showed her where, you know, outside, we took her outside, pointed up on the ridgeline, we pointed over there in the woods, you know, where this thing was, and that charged us, and she was just like, I don't understand, you know. She's just like, I just don't understand. So then we walked up to the top. We actually just walked. We followed some of the mining trails up, and then we just sort of traversed our way along the top of this ridge line through the trees. And when we got to the spot, it was really easy to get to and really easy to find. On one side, it was all just like wet, dark soil. And on the other side, like out in the open, it sort of opened up. It actually opened up behind the trees. So like where we were looking up at the trees, if you went behind there where we saw the light, there was a huge opening. I mean, huge. And there was this giant pit that like went way down. It looked like a sinkhole or something and it was massive. And it had taken in the forest with it, you know, and it went so far down that we couldn't even see the bottom. It was like just pitch black at the bottom, you know, and it was just nothing but trees piled on top of trees, and this giant, massive, like ovular sort of sinkhole, and all exposed sky. But it had rained a couple weeks, you know, leading up to that point. So like the ground was still really wet everywhere. Like there was red clay, there was white clay, there was black earth. And she had some experience tracking. She was like a wild woman. So we just started looking around for anything. And, we found coyote tracks. We found old coyote tracks. We found old coyote scat. We found some fresh turkey tracks. And that was it. We didn't find any signs of human activity whatsoever. There were no footprints of any kind. There was no tread. There was nothing. So that was in 2013, and that changed everything for me, because then I started actually looking into the subject, because I wanted to know not only what was this thing that this massive thing that ran at us, and why did it do that, and why did it seem to just bail out last minute like that, and why couldn't we see it, and then what in the hell was that light? And all these questions started coming up, and I just couldn't stop at that point. So I just started digging and digging and digging and asking people, asking locals, and I started, just reading all this stuff, and nothing could explain what we experienced, other than when I started coming across people's experience with Sasquatch, and started reading some of that and started listening to stuff.
The thing that ran at you in the road, were you able to get any details, or was it more or less just like an outline of just a huge man? I know you had made the comment like a Viking.
That was really all we could tell, was that it was just a very large person. But we couldn't get any detail at all, and I didn't, and it's not like I saw like wavy hair, like the outline of wavy hair or anything like that. It was like, but how when you're in a dark room and, it's pitch black, but it's your room, and, there's like a dresser next to you, and you can see it because your eyes have adjusted, but it's still so black that you can't see it. It's like, there's this massive object there, and you can see it, but you can't make out the detail. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I get it. And you're right. There is odd encounters when people run into these things. It's so odd because sometimes on people's property, and I've talked to many people, even people going out not on people's property, out in the forest, it seems like when Sasquatch is around, these lights are around, and it's really bizarre. And I've seen the lights too. I don't know what to make of them.
And actually, I started to discover that, the more I started looking into it, the more I started to discover that. So I was like, wow, that was like a very rare thing that happened, and it really touched me. And I really, the quest to know has always been there, like I've made very clear. So I just directed all of my attention to that.
Well, can I ask you, was that the only thing that happened on that property?
That was the only thing that happened on that property that I know of. No. After that happened, about a week or two, less than 2 weeks, she calls me on the phone, like hysterical, just like, and I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, she's like, Bobby, I think was the name of their dog. She's like, he would always run off in the forest and back there, where we had our encounter, and he would never come like when we would call. And that was a thing that just went for years, and so somebody would have to go back there and, round him up. And so she was back there doing that with this big spaniel, Cocker Spaniel. And, he got down into this, like, he got off trail, off these mining trails, and he got down into this like really dense area of woods, apparently, where there was like a little trickle of like a spring coming through, and kind of in the heart of like where all these trails intersected, next to their house. And she looked up, he was acting kind of funny, and she looked up because she said something just drew her attention. And in the middle, wedged in between the middle of the fork of this tree, down in the middle of nowhere. I mean, in the densest like rhododendron, like in the middle of this forked tree, wedged so tightly that she had to use her legs to help to like kick this thing out, was a giant blue, like museum, almost museum quality piece of raw aquamarine crystal. Just giant raw aquamarine crystal, like it had just been pulled out of the earth, and somebody just like wedged it down in the fork in that tree. And she took it, and and she showed it to me, and she told me about it first, and then I went back to visit, and she shared it, and she found a couple other of strange things like that out there on a couple of occasions, but other than that, there's nothing that I know of, and I've lost touch with her now. But so I started to like, really, start to soak a lot of this stuff in, and it took my attention off actually the more invasive, like kind of spooky stuff that had been happening, because that was really starting to take a toll, and I was still struggling with my health some, and everything on top of that, like the divorce. I was experiencing a lot at the time, and and so I just like turned my attention towards this, and it was like a good distraction for me, and it was more tangible to me, at the time. It was more tangible, it was like material, and something I could actually like try to understand, gain some understanding of. So the more I heard from people, the more of a variety of, or the more interviews I listened to, and the more things I read, and the more people I connected with, the more of a variety of types of encounters with these Sasquatch beings. Like they had, like these people had all these different kinds of encounters, from hellish to where they, this one lady who's cohorts with my ex-wife, actually, she talked about a family that allowed her to visit their property, I believe in California, and she talked about how they had I know everybody calls it a habituation kind of thing going on their property. They had a bunch of farm animals and stuff like that, and she stayed there for a few weeks with them because they'd been telling her that they were having encounters with, the Sasquatch was on their property. And while she was there, they started to tell her things like, well, they're actually like these lights that we see, and we don't know what they are. And she saw them while she was there, and then they're like, when one of our farm animals gets sick, or like when one of our kids gets sick, they'll sneak into the house, like even while we're there, and leave a pile of a mixture of like medicinal herbs on the kitchen table, like in broad daylight. They'll just sneak in, leave a big pile of whatever it is that the animal needs, like I guess they make a tea out of it or something like that, and they never went into any specific detail there, but I, and I was like, wait, what? I was like, hold on, like. So I started hearing so I started hearing all kinds of things, like that some of these encounters were very like thoughtful and really like, deep and connective in many ways, and very trusting. But then there were other things that I came across that was just like, oh my God, I hope that never happens to me, And I got to the point where I finally just decided I'm going to find a place here, because I was still living in Atlanta. And I was still doing a lot of exploring and stuff, and a lot of solo backpacking, and then I was focused on the whole Sasquatch thing after that. And so I was like, okay, well, the end of 2014 comes around. I tracked down this map of some of the most like active hotspots of sightings in the North Georgia area, and one of them happened to be like really close to where I live, like just an hour drive outside of where I was living at the time, outside like between Ellijay and Chatsworth, Georgia. And I mean, just like this map just showed a hotbed of activity there. So I was like, well, I want to know if these people, if these Sasquatch are I want to know if they're like giant ape species, primate people, or if they actually do have like knowledge of medicine and things like that. If they're like really intelligent and thoughtful and stuff like that, you know, that's where my head went. And I decided to do an experiment, and I just went up to this place called Fort Mountain, where there's a whole, where it turned out, I didn't know at the time, but it turns out there's a whole lot of wild lore around Fort Mountain with like the Moon-Eyed people and the Little People. And then I had a dear friend whose brother owns hundreds of acres of farmland out there convey a story to me that his brother had, where he had encountered these little people while he was looking for a cow out there on his property, and they were like working something out of the side of this dried up creek bed, like way back in this area of his property he never went, you know. And so I started hearing some things like that. But initially I went up there just because I had no idea about the Little People and things at the time. But I initially went up there just to like see if I could maybe interact with a Sasquatch. You know, it was like shot in the dark. And I started exploring the area a little bit, and it only took a couple times. I went out there maybe like the second time, and I was like, okay, well, I was like, you know, I'm an open-minded guy. But I'm also like I'm open-mindedly skeptic. Okay, let's just put it that way. I always have been. And, you know, there is a real skeptical side of me. But at the same time, I was like, well, I know there is a lot to thought energy, emotional energy, you know, and intention and things like that. So I was like, I'm going to hike out here, and I'm actually just going to start talking to these people, or to these Sasquatch, like they can understand me or something, you know. And I didn't even really know about the gifting stuff at the time so much, because I just hadn't heard a lot about it. But I just felt compelled to like leave, like I left like an avocado and some stuff, and I was seeing a lady at the time who was having a lot of pain with her, like with her ovaries and stuff. A lot of like a lot of pain. Had like cysts, and really bad cysts and stuff. And I've always like, you know, empathized. I've been sick a lot of my life, and then especially after that episode in 2012, it was just like you know, a lot of empathy for people suffering. So I was like, you know, I couldn't do much more for her, and I went out there, and I was like, okay. I was like, you know, I started just talking to them like they were around, and I only did it when I actually felt like there was something watching me. When I started to get that creepy feeling, you know, that I had felt before, and so I'd start talking to them, and I said, and this is like the second time I went out there. I said, listen, I'm trying to understand more about you, and I was like, and I have only good intentions. This is going to sound really woo, and I'm really not typically this way, but I, at the time, I was just I was almost like desperate for, not desperate, but I was just the desire for connection or for some kind of confirmation or something was just so intense. So I went out there, and I'm like, okay, listen, I'm like, you know, I hear a lot of these people, you know, they're coming out here with like cameras and guns and all this stuff. And, you know, I see these shows on TV now, and they're ridiculous, you know, and I'm like, you know, I just want to understand more about who you are. And I want to know if you have knowledge of medicine, because that's been on my mind lately, you know, like, because it's a big part of my life. And, I was like, you know, I just have been hearing some stories from California lately, you know, that some of these people have knowledge of medicine and all this stuff, you know, and even stuff with dreams, you know, and stuff like that. So I started talking to the woods, you know, and there was an area out there where I looked up into this boulder field, and I could not, I was pretty comfortable going off trail and by myself and everything, but I could not for the life of me step foot up onto this slope for some reason, into this boulder field. It was really densely forested, and it started to get dark. So I started to I turned around. I didn't have my headlamp or anything, and I started to head back. And I said, like I said, I'm only here to establish some kind of maybe trusting relationship, get some kind of maybe understanding, and really just, if you have knowledge of medicine, like, it would be awesome if you could share it with me, so that I could like share it with, my people, who need it, my immediate family, is how I actually was saying it at the time. I was like, and I was specific. I was like, there's this girl, and I described her, and I said her name, and blah, blah, blah. On my way back up the there was like this really big chunk of medicinal mushroom sitting in the middle of the trail, and it hadn't been there before, and it was like it had just been picked off a tree, and it was huge, and it was just like in the middle of the trail, and I was like, oh, that's weird, and I looked at it, and I picked it up, and I was like, nah, so I walked out, and when I got back to the parking lot, it had gotten real dark or almost totally dark at that point, and a fog had rolled in, so it was like, almost dark. It was foggy, and you couldn't really see much of the trees. And I got back to my car. I was the only car there, and it was real quiet. And all of a sudden, I just hear this one loud single thunk, like against a tree, like just this clunk, like a knock, but like a very heavy, solid tree knock kind of thing, and just one. And it kind of echoed a little bit because it was so quiet, and it was back behind me where it was back down the trail where I'd just come from. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, no way. There's no way. There's just no way. So I was like, I got in the car and I left. I left with this really creepy feeling. At the same time, I'm like, what am I doing, I'm like still trying to figure my life out at this point, new direction in my life and career and all that stuff. I'm like, what am I doing? And so I leave, and the next morning, now this girl that I was dating at the time, I dated her very briefly. And it was when I had just gotten like back in the dating scene and everything. And I, was an adult at this point. So it was like, it was just different, and I was very like topsy-turvy with all this stuff, and I was very careful with like who I spent my time with. And with her, it was very material, and there just wasn't a whole lot of like, there wasn't a real deep connection. So I didn't share this kind of stuff with her, I didn't like go into these spooky things with her because, I was worried that it would like, I was worried that it would turn her off or make her think I was a freak or something like that. So I just kind of kept it to myself. And she called me the next morning after this time that I went out there, and I like tried to I attempted to establish some kind of contact, and she's like, she's really excited. I mean, super animated. And she's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. She's like, I had this dream. She's like, I've been trying to, I'd slept in that morning. She's like, I've been trying to get a hold of you. She was like, it was so vivid. She said that like, while she was asleep last night, she was going through a period where she was having a lot of pains, and she said while she was asleep, she had this like she described it almost like an out of body experience. And she said she was like lying on the forest floor, or lying on a floor, excuse me. She was just lying on the floor. That's how she worded it. And she said she was like curled up in a fetal position because she was in pain, and in this like very vivid dream that she was having. And she looked up, and she said there were about 4 Bigfoot standing around her, is how she said it, and she said they were all different colors, and she said, and they started brushing these giant like branches and like leaf fronds and stuff like across my abdomen, and they were just like brushing me, and they were like talking to me, but it was like, she's like, I could understand them, but she said, but like we weren't talking. She said, but they were just telling me that it was okay, it was going to be okay, just that I could relax, you know, essentially, and just to relax. And so she's like, so I did what they said. It was like they had very soothing voices, and she's like, and they rubbed these like giant leaf and stick branches and stuff really gently over my abdomen. And she's like, I woke up pain-free. And I'm like, okay, like, you have no idea what just happened yesterday, you know? And I tell her, and she's like, what? You know? And we're both like freaking out at that point. Like, this can't be happening, you know? That's just like too science fiction, you know?
Yeah, that's spooky stuff, man. And I know it's kind of the beginning of the journey. I want to ask you real quick, what do you think that these things are, Blake? I mean, you know, and I've heard this stuff before. It's not the first time I've heard this before. But what is your opinion?
Well, now that I've had so many years now I've had 3 sightings in total. I was about to get to the Ocala National Forest sighting, and it took me about a year before I was comfortable going back in the forest anywhere, even with another person after this happened in 2015. And you know, it was also very, there was some very sort of like supernatural things that happened leading up to this very real material encounter. And then, like I said, and I know I'm going to answer your question, but like I said, it became this thing where once I got comfortable going back into the forest, by the end of 2016, I started exploring a bunch of areas out there, and then it was like I found this area where this clan of these Sasquatch people revealed themselves, and I got footprints, and I got I got all this stuff, and I brought it back to my friend who had been thinking, you know, at this point, my hiking buddy, you know, my backpacking buddy, and he's like looking at the footprint now, and he's looking at this and that now, and I'm showing him these breaks and these structures and things that I'm finding, you know, and he's like, okay, I got to get out there and see it. And then he comes out there, and we start having really close, really intense encounters immediately, and it just took off from there, and it's been going on ever since. And what I've discovered, and I have to say all this first, because I need people to know that I need you or the audience to know that I've gone through a process of discovery with the Sasquatch, where through our relationship that we established in Western North Carolina in 2017, we came to know for sure, without a doubt, that these were actually thoughtful people. And then we started to realize that, wait, these like really large individuals that we're dealing with, like, they're actually like probably kids, and like the adults don't even come around because of the way that they would interact with us and stuff, and the things they would do and the things we started discovering. And they left us, I mean, we started a gifting exchange thing with them, and they left us very thoughtful things. They did very thoughtful things, all off trail, you know. What we've discovered, and I know it's different with every, and I want to share, like I said, it's only the tip of the iceberg here, Wes. Like I wish I could have gotten to the stuff where, you know, these other couple sightings or this other sighting and all the stuff.
We can definitely do a part 2.
Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, especially when I'm in a place where I can communicate better. Cause like I said, I'm just not in the greatest space. It does take a lot of energy to talk about this stuff. It's kind of exhausting, actually. But but what I've come to find, what we've come to realize, is that they're some kind of people. Now, since we have been interacting with them regularly all over Western North Carolina and North Georgia now, it's like all of a sudden, it's like this, Wes. Like, it's like this. It's like everywhere we go now, we don't bring cameras and stuff to document or anything like that. We never did that. We just go out there to see what we can find, see who's there, and pretty much everywhere we go out to these remote territories, they're there. What we've discovered in our region, at least, and I think it's just like with people, and this is one of the reasons I say they're like people. It's just like with people, you have different, temperaments, in different areas of the world, different parts of the country. Every individual person has their own unique personality. Every little family has their own sort of energy, or their sort of dynamic. You know what I mean? So far, the Sasquatch that we have encountered, that we have confirmed fit every description known of Sasquatch, what we've discovered is that they are a people. At least here, at least the ones that we're dealing with,
like
and
humans.
That
When you say
yes, like humans, but more than human, like superhuman. That's the best way I can say it. It's like they're superhuman, because now we've seen what they can do with their strength. We've witnessed spectacular things. We've had things happen with our psyche, with our psyches and our dreams and things like that just can't be dismissed, as just coincidence, or the imagination acting up, or the subconscious, or whatever. Things that have happened in person, in close quarters with these people, where they have abilities that supersede or that seem to be more advanced in certain ways than humans. And I'm not saying like all of them are like this, but all of our experiences with them so far have been like they operate in these like little family units or something, but they definitely can they're definitely all over the place out here. I mean, everywhere you go out here, they're there. They mimic owls. The ones that we interact with mimic owls, barred owls, really well, and do some other like whistling and things like that with us. But it's like really loud. It's like really bassy and loud. And I mean, even to the point where like when we were in the Uwharrie last year with a really good friend of ours to take her out there to do some exploring, one came to the edge of our campsite, and this is a whole nother story, but one came to the edge of our campsite and was like screamed at us. And then immediately after he or she like belted like, ah, it was like, and then all these coyotes started going off like hundreds and hundreds of yards down from us in the forest. And, like stuff like that. But they when our interactions with them and the things that they've done, and like I said, the details of like that I can share with you, like the gifting exchanges and things like that, it's like they think like people, and they grow like I felt some kind of attachment with the ones that we've been interacting with out in Western North Carolina specifically. A very strong attachment, and like to the point where I have some kind of soul pact with these people now. That's the best way I can describe it. And I know that might sound kind of funny to some people, but that's the best way I can describe it. It's like I have some kind of soul pact with these people. And what I'm getting at is now it's like wherever we go, we're like, oh, look, snap here, break here. Oh, let's walk in the woods a little bit. Oh, here's some structures. Here's some trees that have been pushed over and have had a bunch of freshly pulled up and broken trees woven through them, and all this all woven through the root systems, and all this, and piles of things, put on top of these structures, and just all kinds of things that we're finding. And Wes, I can send you pictures that I've got on my phone, just from snapping shots out there the last
I'd love to see
years.
them. I absolutely would love to see them.
I did keep some pictures on my phone. So and there's stories behind some of them. So we'll just have to connect on that too. But my whole point is, when we go out in the forest and we start looking at all of their things, and now we just know that they're there. It's like the gig is up. It's like it's almost like, I don't know if they just see us wherever we go. It could be an area we've never explored before. And I don't know if they're just like watching us from the start, and they see us going in and looking at all of their stuff, and they just know that we're not afraid of them now, because now we're comfortable enough to where there's places that we frequently visit where we'll camp out, and after we turn off our headlamps and the fire dies down and we start to go to our tents, they'll come up to the edge of our campsite and start whistling, like, just 15 feet from us, and we'll be sitting like on a log, and they'll be behind us, and just out of nowhere. I mean, like they just like walked up into the campsite out of thin air, even though we're surrounded by dense forest. All of a sudden, just like about 7, 8 feet off the ground is this really loud whistle on the back of our necks. Like, not like that, but similar to that, like a cat call, almost like. And we've had them do it to us so many times now. It's so familiar. It's like almost like they're saying, "I see you." That's what it sounds like they're saying with their whistle. Very loud, very bassy.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you. I mean, a lot of people talk about those type of encounters, and I'll definitely have you back for a part 2, Blake. I would love to hear about your third sighting, and then maybe we could talk more about Florida if you're open to it. But I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your encounter. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Wes.
Thanks, Blake. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. If you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Pick yourself up a flask. Until next time, everyone.
Epiphany, bring the shore.